Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him, but he talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver, pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger, no sweating working for the man, alright.
Hey, race fans, welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to the Drafting the Circuits program. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk about everything in racing. Joining me in the studio, Luis Torres and Richard Youden. As always, fellas, how we doing?
Good, thank you.
Been pretty good.
All right, so I do want to mention off the top of the show, our show is sponsored by Dan Blay Racing Art and also by The Legend of the First Super Speedway, a fine book by Mark Dill. You can find Dan Blay, B-L-E-Y, on Facebook. Look him up. He makes custom die casts, and firstsuperspeedway.com is where you find the link to purchase the book, Legend of the First Super Speedway. Also a treasure trove of early racing information in there, 1920 and prior. I want to thank both those guys for hopping on board and supporting us. But gosh, we've got a lot to unpack this week here. We had all three major series in action. We had the Indycars at Texas, and Louise, you were there on the ground in Texas. So let's start by talking about this XPEL 375 at Texas, which as we previewed it last week, we kind of were, wondering what the racing would look like. And it turned out to be a whole lot better than we thought. Unfortunately, the crowd very light, putting the future of that race in jeopardy once again. But Louise, you were there on the ground. So what are your impressions of this Texas race where we saw a last lap pass for the win to just kind of cap off a pretty darn good race?
It's interesting you mentioned that. First of all, that's the thing. The promotional element was just bad. And I think between myself and Joey Barnes were talking about it, it kind of gave us some Fontana 2015 vibes where before that was dropped, the attendance and promotion was not the greatest at all, yet the racing was superb. And the race itself got better as it went on to where the outside line was actually usable to the point that Joseph Newgarden used the high group to get by Scott McLaughlin. Well, I thought coming to the white, he had that thing in the bag. He had that thing won. And then Newgarden decided to chance it and go for it. And he went by and got the win, which was Team Penske's 600th. But it was made clear, had it not for one, there was a special 30-minute practice session before the final one where 7 of the 27 drivers tested, including Will Power, Takuma Sato, and Ed Carpenter, just to name a few. If they didn't have that test, that little special session, that outside group would have probably not been utilized, and then we would have seen McLaughlin start the year 2-0. So
this extra session, I believe it was Will Power who kind of was the brainchild of the idea, and it featured just those 7 cars, just strictly laying rubber down on that high groove. So they weren't out there trying to set a lap time or doing anything. They were doing nothing but putting rubber in that high groove, and it to your point, it paid off. By about the time we got to the halfway point of the race, we had a really good 2-groove racetrack, which we haven't had at Texas in a couple of years.
Yeah, and it did help running it in the day, and also this aero package that they got has suited them well to the point where, you saw that move, but the problem, and that adds to another concern. Would you want it to be now in March? Because I think the conditions were perfect. The timing of the day of the race, maybe super early to some people compared to what they're used to, like they run, but it's not that far behind the other races where they normally start around noon or a little bit past noon. So But these conditions were ideal. The package was good, and as much as Will Power got what he wanted, he still felt like had there been, and rather than 7, there should have been more than 7, if not all 27 running it. So it'd been a 90-minute session total, rather than the 7 doing the 30 and then the additional 60 after.
Yeah, well, I mean, perhaps the other drivers have now seen the value in that, and should we return to Texas next year, maybe that'll become a thing. But yeah, at the end of the day, like you said, the March date, because this race is traditionally held in June.
Yeah,
and June in Texas is hot. There's no other way to put it. They say June in Texas is hot. So
trust me on that.
Cooler temperatures, nicer breeze. We know Indycars operate on ovals best where the temperature is just kind of moderate. If it's too cold, they can't get heat in the tires. If it's too hot, it's just miserable. So it's kind of like, maybe this March date has some legs to it. But again, without Eddie Gossage there, who was a big proponent of keeping IndyCar at the track, certainly because IndyCar was one of his, IRL at the time was one of his first partners there when they first opened the track, along with NASCAR, and they've kind of had a good relationship. But with Eddie out of the picture, are the current management of Texas going to see the value in having? There was maybe 12,000 people there.
It was definitely very few, and I think it really boils down to promotion, which was egregious. If we want to talk about promotion, look at what Iowa is doing with the Hy-Vee doubleheader. And when I was there at Texas, I couldn't tell what event was there. I don't think there was anything, and I know, and this in modern day racing promotion, you got to have something to keep the crowd going. Yeah, I know the race started before noon local, but you gotta get people in there. Otherwise, you're just gonna get the peers that wants to see the session. But if you want to get a strong crowd and get a return on investment, like what Iowa is doing, you got to go in that direction, much to the chagrin of some people who just wanted to see the race. But then again, you look at Indianapolis, they have the stake pit, and that's bode them well, just for those who want to hear music that is definitely not my cup of tea at all. But
but then again, they sell a ticket to these couple of thousand people who aren't even watching the race, but it's their own little event within an event. But every ticket they sell to them is money going to the coffers of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So it's a real smart thing, But I mean, so what did Texas have in the way of ancillary events going on? Right? Did they have any concerts? Did they have any support races?
No. And that's the thing. In 2019, they did with the truck series. But the difference is in 2019 to the early 2000s, you didn't have that bundle package where to get an IndyCar ticket, IRL ticket, and it comes with the NASCAR ticket when you have those supporting series, mostly the truck series, and you got all those large crowds watching because it came part of a bundle deal. But
sure. And this, the same thing happened to Kansas back in the early days of the IRL. The IRL certainly benefited from the fact that these newer tracks were being built and wanted to sell out the races, and they knew that the in-demand ticket was the Cup race, and they said, okay, you can have a Cup race ticket, but you're going to have to also purchase the season ticket, which will get you the ticket for the IRL. And most folks, since they bought it anyway, went to the races, and we saw a great crowd for the early IRL at places like Kansas and Texas and this and that. But there's not, there's that is not happening today, nor should it. I mean, we shouldn't have people go to an IndyCar race because they were forced to buy a ticket. I would rather see somebody go to an IndyCar race because they somehow caught news about it and were enamored by the series and wanted to go to the race. But if you're not putting the word out there, and to your point about Iowa, Hy-Vee is probably one of the greatest sponsored partners to come in to the series.
Yeah,
and as far as promoting the series, because it was the Texas XPEL, right? I mean, where was XPEL, right? And what do they even make? They make car care products, right?
Yeah, and they're also the title sponsor of the truck race at COTA this weekend. And I'm not sure what they have promoting a Coda, but I know for a fact the only thing of note that they had promotional wise is with Pato and Arlington nearby the AT&T Stadium, but that's about it. There was nothing else out there. And like Joey said, is in his column, the only thing he's heard radio and TV promotions. I've heard TV promotions from afar through NBC, whether it might have been on the family networks or where vice versa. But promotion, Billboard. When I was there, all I saw was WrestleMania 38 and the WNBA team, which is good for the WNBA. They got promotion, but I didn't see one IndyCar billboard when I was there. Not one.
Yeah, and they wonder why the stands are empty. So, but let's talk about some of the other guys in the field. Now, we had talked about Jimmy Johnson, and I was pretty adamant of the fact that I felt like he would not embarrass himself on the oval. And as a matter of fact, he did not. He rallied to a 6th place finish, and it's so funny how people like to throw shade at Jimmy Johnson, because somebody had posted something on social media. Hey, great job, Jimmy Johnson, rallied to 6th. And then some other dude posts in there and he's like, well, where would have Jimmy finished if there weren't 9 guys at DNF? I'm like, okay.
The only one he would have probably have difficulty is probably Elio and Graham. And still with that, it's still a top 10.
But here's the thing, right? What's objective number 1 on race weekend? Finish the race, right? Jimmy finished the race. Those 9 guys didn't. You know what I mean? It's just like, why is it so hard just to say, man, Jimmy did a great job without trying to find a way to minimize his accomplishment? It cracks me up.
Yeah, he kept the store out of trouble. He got better as the race go on. Had it not been for a telemetry issue, Johnson would have finished in the top 5. He hung toe to toe with Pagano. He hung toe to toe with Pato, and then his teammate Scott Dixon. The only thing, if it wasn't for like the fuel concern, Johnson would have probably finished in top 5 over Dixon, no less, who's won this race 5 times. But no question, he's like, he got better over time. And yeah, even if you included Elio, Takuma Sato, and Graham Rahal all taken out by one way or the other, depending how you view, by Devlin DeFrancesco, who had an appalling race in the terms of how much harm he caused in the competition, where you had guys who had great runs like Sato and Kyle Kirkwood, who really was sporty up until then. But it just boils down to like experience versus inexperience. But you saw rookies with inexperience hung their own, but with DeFrancesco, it's just learning the kinks of it. But he didn't necessarily got the greatest impression by the drivers that were out of the race as a result.
No, DeFrancesco did not make any friends this weekend, and certainly the Andretti team had an appalling weekend.
Oh no, they reliability issues.
Rossi was out very early on with mechanical. Grosjean was out with mechanical. DeFrancesco was taking everybody out left and right, and I want to say
Herta was MIA.
Herta, yeah.
And that's the thing about we talked about last year about Herta. He's there when he's there. When he's not, he is not.
He is not, yeah. But I tell you who was there 2 races in a row, Scott McLaughlin. So here's a guy who dominated on a street course. And now we get to a totally different discipline of racing, which is the oval. And he did well at the oval at Texas last year, and he nearly wins the thing. So here's a guy that Penske has kind of hung their future on a little bit, and he is really delivering the goods. I mean, this kid is something else.
He's got a knack for these ovals as well. The fact that he was in control from it, got by real quick through Felix Rosenqvist real quick, and pretty much held his own really well to the point to where we must start considering me a title contender and perhaps an early favorite to win the 500. Oh,
well, winning the 500 is a bold pick, but title contender for sure. I mean, he's already got him a good lead in the thing. So now I need to say one of my favorite phrases that I like to say in this show, and that is, Richard, you've been quiet over there. So did you get a chance to watch the Indycars at Texas, and what were your impressions?
Yeah, I caught a big chunk. I missed the first probably third of the race, but I did see the conclusion of the race. I thought it was really good race, I thought. It's ironic, isn't it? Last year and probably early part of this year, we were criticising Penske for not being at the races and literally and figuratively. And then they win the first two on the bounce, and I think they had 3 in the top 4 at Texas. So it's like, shows what I know about that, then, doesn't it? But I thought, it was a really, really good race. It was, in a way, I know they wanted to try and bring that second lane in, but sometimes on these ovals, if you have 2 lanes all the time, it doesn't really make it. I don't want to use the word skill, but it sort of takes an element away from it. Whereas when you have 1.5 lanes, it makes the drivers with the bravery and skill to take that high lane particularly. And I'm thinking, you mentioned him earlier there, Jimmy Johnson. Some of the moves you made around the outside. Oof, yeah, that was. They were pretty ballsy, but great to see. Whereas if you'd had this second lane, you'd be like, okay, somebody's gone around the outside, great, woohoo, Yeah. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it a little bit there, but very impressed with Penske. They've really stepped up. And as you mentioned there, all of this talk about Colton Herta being championship favourite. Through the first 2 races, I know he had top 5 at St. Pete, but it wasn't amazing. This is what we talked about last year. If he wants to catch the attention of these F1 guys, and I know he's got this McLaren test coming up later in the year, you can't finish top 5. Top's not. You've got to be competing week in, week out for race wins, because that's what's going to get attention, especially in a series like the Indycar series, where the talent pool is probably not quite as deep as it is in Formula One, and you've got to really, really stand out. So yeah, he's got to. How much is it, Andretti? I don't know, but he's got to. You think he's got to win one of the next 2 races, really, to sort of get his championship season back on track and dominate those wins and be impressive like he was at the end of last season in places like Laguna and places like that.
He's in luck with that because Long Beach is the next round, and that's where he last won 2 or 3 races ago.
True.
6 months ago, but no, yeah, he was.
You see that, but that's a perfect example there, Luis. If he doesn't win or he's not ultra competitive, then that obviously starts to raise question marks. And this is where we've talked about this so many times on this show. The difference that I've seen between the guys racing in Europe and the guys racing in the US. If a guy in the US has an off weekend or isn't competitive, it's, well, whatever, move on to next week. In Europe, it's not. If you have a bad weekend, that's bad. It's not, well, we tried our best, let's move on. It's a different mentality, and maybe, I don't know, I'm sort of speculating here, but I don't think you can have bad weekends if you want to make it to the top in Europe. I really don't.
Yeah, that's one of the things he's got to have to step it up. It's one thing for an IndyCar where everybody gets points, whereas Formula One, if you even finish outside the podium, that could cost you dearly when it's top 10 only.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean,
worse back in the day where Formula One was top 6 and CART was top 12.
Well, look what happened to his team boss when he was in Formula One.
Mm-hmm.
He gets a podium and then gets fired.
Yeah, a lot could change, and I think a lot of people need to realize that because the last couple of guys that came from IndyCar, whether it's IRL, CART, or vice versa, with the exception of Montoya, they not panned out well.
No, and
Montoya
has been part of but Montoya was part of the Williams Young driver program, and then was loaned to Ganassi, wasn't he? If I remember rightly.
I think it was like Formula 3000 or rather they go to Formula 3000. He went to CART and then own
I think that was the plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he dominated that first season, didn't he? I mean,
Yeah, in the second year is when they went to Toyota and they were unreliable, except for Indianapolis, where I think they were
Yeah.
Oldsmobile because the IRL had different engine suppliers.
Oh, what? Yeah, sure.
But yeah, it kind of shows you the difference.
I really do hope he does, but the boy's got to step it up.
Well, for sure, because there's even rumblings about where Pato's going to end up after 2022.
Well, yeah, Pado's comments on McLaren were interesting, weren't they? You know, because obviously he wasn't he's part of the, McLaren stable, if you like, but then it turned around and there was no, he wasn't selected as part of this young driver lineup, and guys like Colton Herta were, and some of his comments were like, well, I don't know where my future lies, if it's in or outside of McLaren, I'm not really bothered as long as I've got a competitive drive. And it's like, that's not towing the company line, is it? That's yeah. I don't know if that was going to be massively popular, those sort of comments.
Yeah, it's going to be silly season is already rumbling for sure. But yeah, he's going to have to step it up. And kind of my final comment is that Marcus Ericsson got his first oval podium, albeit we don't celebrate podiums on ovals, but it's his first on an oval. He had a quiet day, and that's the thing normally what Ericsson typically does. It's like when you least expect it, it's like, oh, Ericsson got third out of it. Ganassi had a strong show. Honestly, Ganassi had a quiet but noble showing with all of their cars, to be honest. And then finally, the last noteworthy thing is Santino Ferrucci in the third Rahal car. Like literally, what was it? Less than 3 hours before the race, he got the nod to take over Jack Harvey, who had a heavy shot in final practice on the backstretch. The through IndyCar protocol, like the G forces he had, that he wasn't medically cleared, and Ferrucci, who was there the day before at Texas, just roaming around the paddock, talking with AJ Foyt.
It's like the Boris said of IndyCar, isn't it?
Yeah, he jumps right in. He jumps right in. If we're talking about his hair, I don't think I could compete with him, even if I trimmed the sides and try to keep the whole front end. It's gotten, but that's a different story. But all things considered, for only being in the car 15 minutes just to do installation laps and all that, to get into the ninth is quite admirable. Yeah, there was attrition, but he held his own, stay out of trouble, and brought the car that is their 500 car in one piece.
Yeah.
For Harvey, because of course Richie's going to be driving the second Ryan Reinbold car.
Oh, I thought he did impress. He did very, very well. Good job he didn't have a big night on Saturday, wasn't it? Otherwise, he may not have been in a state to drive. But no, very impressive. He, obviously a very polarizing figure, I think, with some of his, his history. But there's no doubt the kid's quick. You just wonder if he's got enough about him to land a full-time drive at the moment, which is, it's a shame. But you've got to talk the talk as well as walk the walk, don't you?
Yeah, and I think a strong month of May is going to really help him. The only thing I know is that after Indy, he's going to run some NASCAR races. That's what he did last year, but none before the month of May. So if he's laser focused on Indy with Ryan Reinbold, there'll be an interesting combination, because we saw Karen can quietly put up good runnings at Indy. I mean, last year, he put the 24 in the top 10, had a solid month of May, quietly but solid month of May, which, the big motive is to win, but it's also good to see momentum building from that organization. I think expanding go on.
No, sorry. I was just asking about May with is he running the Grand Prix as well as the 500, or just the 500?
I think it's really the 500, to my knowledge. I haven't heard much as far as expanding to it.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, because right now, what are we looking at? I think it's the last time I've heard is 32 confirmed entries, and I think with what we saw in the IndyCar paddock, I think we could see 30 if they want to run it, but I don't think they are.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, because I think he's, he's certainly quick enough. As I say, it's just some of that baggage that surrounds him. I think has left a bit of a lasting legacy, unfortunately. Some of the team owners won't touch him with a stick, which is a shame. But at the end of the day,
because the
You know,
only
motorsport
main
is a-
criticism he's got is just Josh Berry giving him the bird of Phoenix for the incident. That's about it to my
Well,
recent memory.
Well, there was the whole thing in Formula 2 and
No,
when
I
he was
know.
racing in Europe, which, you know.
That's what I said. Since
um,
that whole
yeah,
fiasco.
for sure. But again, you know, there's what it's like these, you know, in a way, I think, you know, racing is very similar to a lot of these high contact sports. And I'm going to use, you know, growing up, I used to play it as a kid, rugby. You know, if any of you have ever watched rugby games, you know how hard, you know, these guys hit each other. But between oppositions, there's a huge amount of respect because they know they can do each other serious injuries. And the same revolves around motorsport. You know, the way they drive is always very, very respectful to each other. It can be hard and it can be sometimes just push the limit. But on the whole, because they know what potential injuries they can cause to each other, they are typically very, very respectful to each other. And I think Ferrucci sort of crossed that line a little bit. I think it was at Silverstone, wasn't it? And it's unfortunate that he sort of put himself in that situation, but people have very long memories.
The interesting thing about that is if you go back and watch that, yeah, and then people tell you that he just took his teammate out or hit his teammate, he gave him a little bump, but I think it was the aftermath there where they accused both him and his father of using racial slurs against the teammate who was of Indian descent. But of course there was, that was never proven or never, did it happen? I don't know. Some folks say it did, but that ran him out of Europe. But I think for sure, here in the States, he's developed, number one, a pretty decent fan base in IndyCar. People tend to like the guy for his bravado on the ovals. He's certainly if you recall the Indy 500 a couple of years ago when he took to the grass to avoid a wreck, and came back and finished in the top 10. Yeah. So, but I mean, I get the feeling that he was probably in line for that Hy-Vee ride. But I have a feeling that maybe Hy-Vee as a corporation found Jack Harvey more palatable, even though Hy-Vee the funny thing is Hy-Vee had stated that they really wanted an American driver. And of course, Santino, from Connecticut, he's an American driver. And Jack Harvey is not. Although, with a name like Jack Harvey, they could probably pass him off as an American, Santino Ferrucci, probably pass him off as a European. But either way, the kid came into Texas, short notice, earned whatever they decided to pay him for the day. And, good finish for him. So, and it just keeps him on the mind of, guys in IndyCar that may need a quick fill-in or maybe need a driver for next year.
Yeah,
I wonder if he's going to end up suffering from like the Hulkenberg syndrome, though. Everybody's like, "Oh yeah, he's a great driver. He's a great driver." I'm not going to give him a full-time drive though, but he's a great driver. And "Oh yeah, he stepped in and he did really well in a race when somebody was injured or unwell or whatever." We're not going to give him a full-time drive.
The Memo Moreno. I mean,
Roberto Moreno. Yeah, you're mixing Roberto Moreno, super sub. Yeah, I love that guy. But yeah, you just mentioned the character from the movie Driven.
Yeah,
Memo Moreno. That's hilarious.
And then I said Roberto Guerrero after him. That's like make matters worse.
Yeah, Roberto Guerrero, another fine driver. Another fine driver, yeah. So,
yeah, Roberto Moreno. It's like
you're taking all the drivers of Latin American descent and lumping them into one category, Louise. I am disappointed in you.
It could have been worse. I could have said Memo Gidley. So.
Yeah, Memo Gidley. That's. I think Memo Gidley is where the name Memo Moreno comes from. Because. I think Stallone just, kind of mashed up those names there because he'd been spending time on the kart series.
The funny thing, Gidley, wasn't Gidley's rookie year in 2000, though, when the film was in production? Like, when they started filming all that stuff? Because they said, no, it was 2000. Because
he had been around, though. He was running lights and he was filling in here and there, so he was...
He was in the De La Pena car, the DirecTV 10 car.
Yeah, he was there because I know Memo was driving, because I remember when I first saw the Driven movie that I'm like, okay, yeah, they just grab Memo Gidley's name because they like that and combine it with Roberto Moreno. So, but anyway, but we digress. We have 2 more races to talk about. So, IndyCar, we've got this coming weekend off, and then we're headed to Long Beach, which is kind of interesting. We're going to have 2 Long Beach Grand Prix within, a short time of one another.
Yes.
With yeah. So it'll be good to see the cars back at Long Beach, one of the big prestige races. Again, like you said, the defending champion is Colton Herta, who really needs to get his season on track, because if we get 3 races in and his results are shit like that, championship's done. And for him and his teammate Rossi as well. Both those guys, it's almost, I know it's early in the season, but it's a short season in IndyCar, and you can't afford to get that far behind that quick. Not with guys like Scotty Mack, taking a first and a second in the first 2 races. But let's turn our attention to Formula One, where we did not see the usual cast of characters on the podium. Ferrari 1-2. When's the last time Ferrari had a 1-2?
2019.
2019. So it's been a minute.
It's been a few years, yeah.
It's been a minute. And then we saw no Mercedes on the podium.
We did. We saw Hamilton.
Oh, that's right. Hamilton was third. Oh no, I'm sorry.
Yep.
We saw no Red Bulls on the podium.
No.
Yep.
The Red Bull both failed to finish, and and we saw a Haas car in the top 10.
Top 5.
The top 5. We saw Haas car in the top 5. Yeah. So so that goes to show that the strategy of throwing away 2021 and getting ready for 2022 has worked out for Haas, because we had questioned their motives in
Ferrari design a car for you.
And certainly yes, because what's good for Ferrari is also good for Haas.
On the whole,
on the whole. So Richard, let's break down this season opening Grand Prix. Great for Ferrari to start out so strong out of the box, because the last couple of years they've kind of threatened to be pretty good, and they've kind of. When's Ferrari's last championship? Was it Kimi?
Oh, Kimi, 07.
In 07, So it's been a while since they've really, we've had a couple of good years with Vettel there, but he never quite sealed the deal on the championship. He was battling with Hamilton. But here we are.
The last time I had the competitive car was probably 19, and then they had the engine, whatever you want to call that, where they were penalised by Ferrari, but apparently didn't break any rules. But then they did, and then they didn't, and then nobody knew what they did. So that's another story. It's been a few years since Ferrari been competitive, but it was great to see them back up there and really give an opportunity to a driver like Charles Leclerc to show what he's capable of. I mean, we know what he's capable of. I mean, the guys are up there in the upper echelons of driver talent in Formula One that we see at the moment. Mercedes are in trouble. If you call being the 3rd fastest car out of 10 trouble, which I guess you do these days, for them anyway, and their level of expectation.
Well, if the Red Bulls would have finished.
I mean, if
they were well ahead of Mercedes in practice and qualifying.
Yeah. Oh yeah, without a doubt, it's Ferrari and Red Bull at the moment are the 2 top teams, and then you'd put Mercedes in the 3rd, category. So in reality, if everybody finishes in their respective positions, it would be 5th and 6th place for Mercedes. But they ended up finishing 3rd and 4th, with Hamilton in 3rd, Russell in 4th, and Russell having a pretty good race. After a disappointing qualifying, Mr. Saturdays has been called for the last few years through his excellent qualifying performances in Williams. Didn't really deliver this last weekend. He made a mistake on his final qualifying run, which is very unusual. I think a bit of that was due to the issues with the Mercedes car and the way it's driving. But it was damage limitation from Mercedes. In reality, without anything crazy going on, it was the best they could have hoped for. Very, very disappointing from a Red Bull perspective. Probably not the quickest car out there, but certainly a car capable of challenging the Ferraris. But they had, it appears they had fuel issues in terms of lack of issue. And it's my understanding that both cars run out of fuel, which is very embarrassing. Those sort of things shouldn't happen in Formula One these days, especially with a team of Red Bull stature, and also with the high level of scrutiny over fuel flow. And if you remember back probably 7 or 8 years ago now, when this fuel flow sensor was brought in, Red Bull were the ones caught out by that. So yeah, there's a lot of work in the background that needs to be done by Mercedes in terms of performance, Red Bull in terms of operation, and Ferrari pretty much nailed it. They got it spot on, and pole, fastest lap, race win. Pretty comfortable weekend for Charles Leclerc there. Some disappointing cars, further back in the pack. McLaren were out to sea, pretty badly. Partly, Daniel Ricciardo obviously missing the final test didn't help them, but bigger issues are brake issues, brake temperature issues for that car. So they probably were running the car, for want of a better word, detuned. The Aston Martins were very, very poor as well. It didn't help, obviously. Seb Vettel missed the race with after testing positive COVID. And super sub Nico Hülkenberg stepped in and did a very, very competent job in a massively different car from anything he's driven before in terms of single-seater racing. So you've got to give him, kudos for doing what he was able to do in that car, especially putting up a comparable performance to Lance Stroll, who's obviously done a lot of pre-season testing and a lot of simulator work, which is, Nico has obviously not been able to do any of that. Williams were pretty solid, but then the two teams that probably have taken the biggest performance gains from 2020 and 2021 have been the Haas cars, which we mentioned, and also the Alfa Romeos. Haas had a very, very strong weekend with Kevin Magnussen back in the car, qualified in 7th, I think it was, ended up finishing the race with 2 Red Bull retirements in 5th. So you've got a really huge amount of credit to those guys. Phenomenal performance considering where they've been in the last 2 years. And
then again, Alfa Romeo also linked to the Ferrari team as well. So again, when Ferrari does well, that goes downhill to their associate teams. So
without any doubt, no, they've certainly made a huge improvement on the engine side. The 25 or so horsepower that they were supposedly down from Honda and Mercedes in 2020 and 2021 seems to have been reduced. I know Ferrari have done a lot of work with Shell on their fuel, which potentially has seen a big chunk of those improvements. But you mentioned there Alfa Romeo as well, and Valtteri Bottas stepping up into that sort of team leader role that he's never really had in the past. Out-qualified George Russell, ironically, and was racing against Hamilton pretty, for sections of that race there. I'm not quite sure which order you pronounce his name, but I think it was Zhou Guanyu. I think that's how they pronounce it on the. No, that's how it's written, but I think in Chinese you pronounce it the other way around. I think from what I saw of the coverage, the second driver at Alfa Romeo scored points in his debut. Fantastic drive, mature drive. Didn't do anything crazy. Kept the car on the black stuff and did what he needed to do. And I think even I can't think of the guy's name now. Alpha Tauri, Gasly, and
Yuki Tsunoda.
Tsunoda scored some points, I believe. And again, another solid race. Mick Schumacher got close. I think he finished P11.
Yeah,
but this is a big year for Mick. He's 23 now, so he's only a year younger than Max Verstappen. And you look at what Verstappen's achieved, and you look what Mick's achieved, a little bit different there. But if Mick is this heir apparent to a Ferrari seat, which is what Ferrari have always said, then he's got to be beating but Magnussen. And the fact Magnussen came in with zero or very, very limited testing and beat Mick pretty resoundingly in the first race doesn't, it makes you wonder that. And the fact, by sounds of things, that Carlos Sainz is signing an extended contract with Ferrari makes you wonder where Mick's long-term future lies. I do worry a little bit, and maybe it hurt him having a poor benchmark in his first season in terms of Mazepin. You know, you like to see a young driver come in against an experienced driver who can learn and develop and have a benchmark. You know, Haas didn't have that last year with either of their drivers, so they could have been as bad as each other. Whereas now Mick's got this is almost like, to me, in some ways, this is Mick's rookie season because he's got a known benchmark and he's got something to prove himself again.
Yeah, so absolutely. If you look at the whole thing, I mean, you know, Haas they set themselves up for disaster. Number one, with the fact that they weren't going to develop the car, they were going to push towards 2021, and then they hired two rookie drivers. So you've got nobody. You've got two rookies on a team and a car that you're not going to develop. You know, it's really stifling for Mick's career to have to suffer through that season. So hopefully, with the fact that they've got a pretty decent car now, and he's got a teammate who can probably really help the guy. If he chooses to kind of take that mentor role and help his teammate out, which doesn't always happen in Formula One.
Very rarely. You don't get your Bottas, your Raikkonen and Giovinazzi. You more or less get your Sennas and Prost in F1.
Sure, but Senna and Prost are not Mazepin and Schumacher. Yeah, but I think it's really for Mick, as far as he's concerned, that season is stifling for him, and that's probably in 1 year put him 2 years behind where he needs to be. But potentially the future looks brighter for him, and this first race of 2022, we're only one race into the books. He did manage to nearly score points, let's not shut the book on Mick yet, but it's not looking like he's the next rising star, that's for sure.
Yeah, not right now, especially from a guy that kind of showed up in 2 weeks' notice almost.
Exactly.
That's the thing. He's just there because, remember, it was about a month or two ago, he was mocking the Haas's team on socials, and now he jumps in there 2 weeks' notice and boom, puts it in the top five.
Yeah, well, but although consider the fact that Magnussen jumping into the Haas car is a little bit of a different situation than, say, Hulkenberg hopping into the Aston Martin, because because Magnussen was employed by Haas, so he knows the mechanics, he knows the engineer, he knows how that team operates from the inside. So it's not as if he's coming in entirely cold. Yes, he's entirely cold when it comes to the new car, but as far as how the team operates and what the expectations are, it's like coming back to work after an extended vacation.
Most certainly, and the same. And that's the difference with Hulkenberg. Hulkenberg, in the past 3 or 4 years, he's just been super subbing people who test positive, like with Perez in 2020 and now with Vettel this past weekend.
Yeah, so, for some people, COVID has been good to them. Certainly Hulkenberg, DoorDash drivers, those sort of things. But so anyway.
Has Vettel been cleared to run at the second round?
I have not heard one way or the other.
I did see something. I think it was yesterday that said that the team are still unsure of Vettel's participation. So it may be that Nico gets another outing.
So are we racing this weekend, or do we have a week off?
Yes,
this weekend in Jeddah.
Yeah, so he actually beat Long Beach's 2 races out of 4.
Yeah, because they ran in December.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And the gap between the last time they ran to now is 2 races, with the 2 being Abu Dhabi and, of course, last weekend in Bahrain.
Yep.
All right, so let's
Anyway,
let's make sure we leave a little time to talk about the Cup guys in Atlanta. So, but let's go ahead and pick us a winner for Jeddah, and I'll start with you, Richard.
I'll go same pick as I went for last week, Sainz.
Okay, and Louise.
Took mine again. Let's go with Leclerc.
Okay, so both you guys are predicting back-to-back victories for Ferrari. Nothing wrong with that, except you didn't leave me a Ferrari driver to pick. So I'll say that Red Bull gets their stuff together and Verstappen picks up this one. So and funny, nobody picked Hamilton, but I think yeah, you can count Mercedes out for a little, but not for long. Not for long. I would imagine that, and we didn't get to talk about the porpoising thing. Then
it'll be interesting to see how that works on a really bumpy street circuit. You know, Bahrain's not the smoothest circuit in the world, but you put yourself out in a street circuit with drains and manhole covers and all that sort of jazz that you're going to be competing against out there, and it's going to be it's going to be really interesting. So wait and see.
Wait and see. All right, so Cup guys were at Atlanta. Reconfigured track, changed the banking, repaved the thing, running it with the tapered spacer, which some folks still like to call it a plate race. But I thought it was a pretty entertaining show. At the end of the day, was like we kind of all said, it would be a Hendrick driver. I think I went with Bowman, but it was Byron. So now all of the Hendrick's guys have won, save for Chase Elliott's. But I know there's
who somehow has the most points of everyone right now.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I mean. He's been finishing consistently. He just hasn't hit the checker, and there's some road courses coming up. So, but the Hendrick's team definitely sitting in the catbird seat as far as the Cup Series is concerned. So, Louise, what was your take on the racing that the newly configured Atlanta produced?
Key word that you just mentioned, entertainment, and that's what Marcus Smith and SMI wants with the Atlanta. They want it to be sports entertainment, and they got their entertainment by being a super speedway race where you can actually shoot on the outside corners, unlike Daytona and Talladega since 2000. But Hendrick had a strong showing, and that's the thing, when they were at Daytona, before the Fords took over from the duels onwards, Hendrick had speed. They were sporty and they ran well. But even without Kyle Larson, who, again, ever since his win, he's been on a downward spiral. None of his own doing, but his results have not been there at all since he won at Fontana. So he's been kind of in a championship slump, despite the fact that when the only beneficiary of, we can't really say a slump per se, is because he's already in the playoffs. But even some people are saying that maybe 16 cars it's not the safest thing to say right now, because we could see it more than 16 different ones. I don't see it yet once the season rolls on, but for Byron winning, he had the strongest car pretty much the entire way through, and towards the end, nobody could really get it. Yeah, you had Bubba Wallace, who's always in the mix in these super speedway races. You had Trackhouse again, both cars in the top 5. Both cars made it in one piece, so this was their best all around weekend.
Chastain was second, was he not?
Somewhere. Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah. So that's 2 second place finishes in a row for that young man.
Yeah, he's been wrecking up top 5s, except for Daytona Fontana. But he's been on a hot roll. But for Byron, I said this last year that Bowman had 4 wins, but Bowman was the second best overall Hendrick driver in terms of performance and speed. The problem that Byron has had, he only had that 1 win last year. This is the same time of year that Byron had a win, and he only ended up winning. The question is, can he start racking up wins with Rudy Fiegel? Because, like I said, Larson may have dominated, and Bowman may have more wins, but outside of Larson, Byron was probably the best overall Hendrick driver in terms of speed and performance. Just the results in wins have not been there yet. And I'm hoping this is the turnaround to where he starts racking up wins to showcase that maybe this driver crew chief combination will bode well in Cup, like they've done in Xfinity and trucks in the past. And mind you, I still credit Rudy Fugle being the main reason why Biffle won Texas in 2019, the Truck Series, because that was their strategy. So I like it. Like I said, this is the big year for Byron. I want him to see him do why I boldly picked he's going to be a championship 4 contender. If he has races like that every weekend, doesn't matter what type of circuit or package they're running, he's going to be a threat. But the question is how he adapts to those road courses. He's qualified good, but the race performances have not been quite there yet. And that's going to be big, the next challenge for Byron. But the racing itself, they got what they wanted. You had your wreck fest. You've had guys that wrecked multiple times and still were there, like Corey LaJoie, whose car lifted up in the air and still finished 5th. And my biggest, and another thing that was very striking and very alarming is how hard these impacts were, like Justin Haley and Bubba Wallace. When you look at the damage to the cars, you just may think, oh, how is that the hardest impact if it's more harder than Pocono? I feel like if there's no way, like you want the damage to dissipate, like to eliminate. If it's all crushed up and bunched up or hardly at all noticeable, if you have a hard impact, that does raise some red flags in my book. Because sometimes it's like when a rider goes upside down, if it eliminates kind of like all that brutal force of an impact when they're all.
Well, you want slow deceleration, don't you? That's the key. What you can have a relatively small impact, but if everything stops quickly, that's when you get into trouble. When you see these accidents where there's bits flying everywhere and the car's disintegrating around the driver, they're normally the ones the driver walks away because the car's doing exactly what it's meant to be doing. Yeah, it's when they stop quickly that's when you get the problems.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to look any farther than say Rusty Wallace flipping at Talladega, or a couple times Rusty had over and over and over and over, and then he hops out and walk away. And then by comparison, Dale Sr., the crash looked relatively minor, right? But the man was deceased when they got to him in the car, because it was just it's not the speed that kills you, it's the sudden stop. Yeah, and that's where the need for items like the Hans device have come across, and that the Hans device has probably saved more guys in racing that you don't even realize. So I want. There's a guy who wrote a book about the Hans device, and I really want to get him on the show, because that would just be a great show. So just let me work on that. But but at the end of the day, so you say this is a hard hit, but it didn't look like much. Yeah, that was a hard hit. Yeah, the damage is like that's not giving. Is the damage is like with Bubba, Justin Haley, Cody Werenor, Rex, and all have brutal impacts. But when you look at the damage, it makes me wonder what will be the limit as far as before you've seen these problems where drivers get hurt. Because when I look back at it, like 2005, when those hard impacts, do you have debris and everything flying all over the place to where you see the radiator? These days, it's all crunched up. And I wonder.
I think you look at the dynamics of of accidents, and they're very very difficult to predict. The multi-dimensional, multifaceted any big impact is. And the one thing that's interesting, and I actually, back in my earlier years, I spent a lot of time researching this and doing some work on this. These drivers, say with Bubba Wallace's accident, for a prime example here. If you or I had been in that car, our potential injuries would have been far, far worse. And the reason for that is, as silly as it sounds, these drivers become conditioned to these sort of accidents. And they start off when they're karting or dirt racing, whatever it may be. You're having 50-mile-an-hour races or whatever, and you have an accident, and as a little kid, that was hard. And as you grow up, your body becomes accustomed to these impacts, and it makes them more survivable. And as Frank mentioned earlier, what would be considered the limit? It's very, very difficult. I think the cars are so well designed that within reasonable expectations of a conventional race, most accidents are survivable with the wall technology they have in terms of the safer barrier, the crumple zones of these cars, and the catch fencing. Where I worry is the issues of cars getting airborne into the catch fencing, because that is a totally uncontrollable dynamic. You look back at only a couple of years ago, Ryan Newman's accident. That is another area for cars on a side. It gets hit into the cockpit area by another car. That again is an area where I think is extremely dangerous. But I think in most series, Formula One, IndyCar, NASCAR, all the big series, a conventional impact is relatively survivable, given the technology has gone in. Where you have the problems are these dynamics that are unpredictable, or so you look at the accident that claimed Antoine Hubert's life in Spa a few years ago. It was just unsurvivable. You could not build a car tragically to survive that sort of accident and impact, and you just have to have that asterisk against motorsport safety, saying you can only go so far. An unpredictable accident like that, we can't do anything about, unfortunately. We can try and prevent it in terms of stopping cars bouncing back into oncoming traffic. And in NASCAR, they try and stop the cars getting airborne. It's a very, very difficult question to answer. What is the ultimate? But I think
the other thing is we talk about what's the threshold, right? And the interesting thing is, and this goes back to this past weekend with Jack Harvey, right? IndyCar had released a statement that they have a threshold for G's that the driver should be able to take, and then if we exceed that threshold, further evaluation is required, and Jack Harvey did not pass it, but they didn't say what the threshold is, right? Or how many G's, right? And then these are, but IndyCar, to their credit, and this goes back to the kart days, they have done more research on concussion and head injuries than probably any industry in the world, and kart makes all their data available to places like the NFL and the military and these sort of things. When we're talking about things with fighter pilots or football players with the concussion injuries.
Yeah.
So whatever, they didn't say what the threshold is, but I'm sure Jack probably was ready and willing and wanting to drive. But they take these kind of things very seriously, and that's where we're at. But we've only got a couple of minutes left, and we do need to mention the fact that somebody wants to enter a next gen NASCAR in Le Mans.
Yeah.
So it's because IMSA and NASCAR teased us for 2 days. Oh, big announcement coming up, and listen, you won't believe this, and that was the announcement, and for sure they were right. That was a surprise out of nowhere, but there is precedent for this. Guys in the 50s, 60s, and 70s took NASCAR cars to Le Mans, but certainly hasn't happened to any time recently. But what are you guys' thoughts on this?
It's going to be real interesting for sure, because I look at it from a schedule point of view.
So what class will this be entered in?
This is a garage 56 entry. It's kind of like which Le Mans class?
It isn't. It's one of these. So it's like when the X-Wing was in Le Mans. This is, as Louise says, garage 56 or whatever. There's basically 55 entries into Le Mans.
Okay.
Entry. And that's for prototype cars that cannot compete for wins, and the like. And the biggest challenge that I'm going to see is driver changes. Because the seats in, and I'm sure, goodness me, a company like Hendrick will have the resources to compete with that. But it's going to be fascinating to see how they do all of that. And they probably won't be able to have side nets. They're going to have doors, all this sort of stuff. So it'll be very much a modified next gen car to adapt to the Le Mans regulations. I don't know.
Certainly it won't look like the car we see at Daytona or Talladega. I'm sure but it'll be interesting to see. And it's it's an interesting experiment to try to bring NASCAR over there to Europe a little bit and let them see a little bit of this. But if it's going to be the guy chugging around at the back of the field who gets lapped again and again by the LPM ones, So.
Yeah, I mean that will happen. Goodness me! But you look at the
certainly. Yeah.
Now I was looking. The only comparable data I can find is for Coda, and you look at now. Of course, it rained last year in the Cup Series, but I think the Xfinity race was dry, and if you look at Kyle Busch, who has the lap record in an Xfinity car, that's about maybe 8 to 10 seconds off the lap record at Coda for a comparable GT car, whatever they call it now. I can't remember what they call the sort of tin top class, if you like, at Le Mans. So, and I'm sure again, this car will be engineered specifically with the resources of GM and Hendrick for Le Mans. So it will be optimized, and it wouldn't surprise me if they're not in the same ballpark. I don't think they're going to embarrass themselves. And at the end of the day, why would NASCAR and Hendrick want to do that? And GM want to put themselves in there to be lapped 50 times in 24 hours, But I think they'll be reasonably competitive. It'll be interesting to see who they get for the drivers. Because obviously it's going to be it'll be, it's a lot like NASCAR's going to have an off weekend, and Le Mans is like a bit like an Indy 500. It's a 2 or 3 week event with qualifying and practice and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah,
so,
and that's the thing that I was talking about.
Yeah, I think GM are actually going to run the car rather than the Hendrick, because actually GM are in the middle of opening up a new performance center next to the Hendrick facility down in Concord. So I imagine it'll be more GM doing this work than Hendrick. And I imagine GM have a lot of engineers working down there, so I imagine they'll run the car rather than Hendrick themselves. I know Chad Knaus is going to take quite a leading role in it, but there's lots of very smart guys down there to do this.
It'll be interesting to see. But okay, so we've got where we racing in Cup next week?
Coda.
So you want to pick a winner for Coda?
I'm going to go with Austin Cindric.
Oh, nice. That's a good pick. Richard?
Chase.
So that leaves me. Kyle Larson won a road course yet in NASCAR?
Yes, Sonoma last year. Could have won Watkins Glen too, if I recall.
Yeah, let me
won Watkins Glen.
Yeah, let me go with Kyle Larson then, because he's a guy that you can't keep him down for too many weeks in a row, especially with his teammates winning. And fantastic. Great show, guys. Listen, I want to thank Dan Blay Racing Art. I want to thank Legend of the First Super Speedway and Mark Dill. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network, YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts. I want to thank you, Richard. I want to thank you, Louise. I want to encourage you to check out our new website. We've redesigned the Drafting the Circuits website. It's no longer hoobazoo.com/drafting the circuits. Straight up type draftingthecircuits.com in your search bar or in your browser, and you'll bring us right to the site. A nice redesign on the site. Thank you to my producer and web guy, Anthony Arnold. But most of all, I want to thank you folks that listen to us. But till next week, good night.
Hoobazoo.com